Started originally back in the days as a MOM MVP, and then a SCOM MVP, and then a System Center MVP, and now eventually Cloud and Data Center. And my interest in this is very much on the technology behind Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm honored to be able to announce first Grant Becker. Grant is a principal consultant with Catapult Systems. Grant has a wealth of knowledge in this set of technologies and is going to be a great subject matter expert for us on this. And then also David Smith. So David Smith is our National Director of the Infrastructure Practice here at Catapult. David also brings a unique experience set to this conversation because he's not only on the consulting side of things, but he's also been on the customer side of things. So it brings a unique perspective that he brings to the table for this. So with that, Grant, David, are you guys ready to start? I'm just going to start firing questions at y'all.
Sure.
All right. Well, here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about kind of a high-level introduction of what is WVD. And for those of you who are worried that this is going to be a death by PowerPoint slide approach, it is absolutely not. Minimal number of slides. Most of today's conversation is going to be very conversation focused, asking key questions. We're going to look at how and why customers are embracing WVD, common questions that we've seen, what lessons we at Catapult have learned working with WVD. If we have time available, we're going to do a short series of screenshots that's going to showcase a demo that we had for this. And then we're going to go into Q&A after that. So with that, let's start with Windows Virtual Desktop, or WVD. So probably starting with Grant and then going to David. So what is WVD? I mean, is this just the same thing, a renamed version of Remote App or Terminal Services, is it, or Citrix or Remote Desktop Services, or whatever Microsoft has renamed this week? Now, what is WVD?
That's a good start to it. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about where this has progressed as a product, terminal services is kind of where we started, and remote desktop services was another name for it, and it moved into the cloud and it started being called remote app, and it's had lots of different names. But I think Windows Virtual Desktop is probably the first polished cloud or Azure specific desktop as a service that they provided. And so what's really happening here is, the backend components that you're used to with remote desktop services, things like the broker and the gateway and all these different infrastructure components, those are handled by Microsoft now. So in a sense, what you're responsible for is the actual session hosts that people connect to. And those can be, pooled session hosts that have multiple people can connect to at a time, or individualized desktops that, have a one-to-one relationship between user and machine. So it's progressed as a product, but underneath the covers, a lot of it is pretty similar to what remote desktop services is.
Okay, but did they bring new technology to bear with WVD, or is it just literally just kind of a rebrand type deal?
Oh, there's definitely new stuff here. So if you're a former RDS person, you're familiar with the profile management that was within RDS, which they called user profile disks, and kind of all the challenges that came along with that. And if you have a shop that was running UPDs and remote desktop services, you kind of know the ins and outs of the challenges with the corruption and locked profiles, and it was kind of a challenge there to maintain a really high performing environment with that. Not to mention the location for it. So you needed to store all of these user profile disks somewhere on your network and pull those across. And really what's happened here is Microsoft purchased another company they called FS Logics a couple years ago, and once they did that, they integrated some of their technology that they had for RDS, which they called profile containers, which was a way to kind of capture a user profile into a file, in this case into a VHD or VHDX, and then store that on some sort of network share. And in the case of Azure here, we can store that within Azure Storage, so as a PaaS service. That then allows you to pull on that profile then to any host that you connect to and really move along your settings and your data host to host.
Okay, good. So to Grant, then in essence, it sounds like this is kind of a combination. It's an evolution of technology that they already had, combination with an acquisition and some rebranding, kind of all put in together to provide Windows Virtual Desktop. Am I summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. And there's another layer into it in moving into Azure, which was the Azure Active Directory identity layer. And so now we're able to apply things like conditional access policies and leveraging multi-factor and anything you can do with Azure Active Directory now is stuff that can be integrated directly into Windows Virtual Desktop. So those pieces are in there, and then that actually adds in the capability then to access it from anywhere, right? So because Azure AD is an identity source, if there's synchronized users from an on-prem Active Directory, we can have them access a desktop from anywhere, and depending on their location or their device type or any of the type of conditions that we would apply with conditional access policies, that would determine what their session looks like.
Okay, great. I might want to delve into that a little deeper as we get into the further slides. But to David, David, do you have additional insights on this and what people really should see as what is WVD?
Yeah, absolutely. Just thinking about what Grant was just talking about, and thinking back to when I was on the other side of the desk as an IT director, I had a couple different international organizations that I worked for, and one of the biggest challenges we always had was that remote access, not only for our end users, but even our administrative staff and being able to manage our environments. And there was a lot of slick solutions out there, slick for the time anyway. Remote desktop services, as Grant mentioned, you had Citrix options, you had VMware, you had a lot of different ways that VPN, a lot of different ways to get into the environment, but they all brought with them this whole host of administrative challenges and connectivity challenges, depending on what your connectivity was, what part of the world you might be in. The WVD really has kind of matured, taken on the best of all those different models and matured it into what is now Windows Virtual Desktop. It's to me, it's a night and day difference in the ease of administration, the centralized administration, the ease of access, the ease of deployment. It's really, in my mind, it's a game changer.
Awesome. Well, then what about, I mean, I know that as a business, we've seen, especially since COVID has started, we've seen a real run on additional infrastructure requirements from our customers that are out there. And I'm sure lots of companies are feeling the exact same pinch because there's a whole lot of infrastructure work that became top priority in essence due to the changes resulting from COVID. And I know a lot of that work has been in the WVD space, but my big question on this one is kind of how and why customers are embracing and adopting WVD. Grant, do you want to go first on this one in terms of kind of where you're seeing people embracing WVD and why?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the COVID situation has really forced a lot of this to the forefront. I want to say March was an absolutely crazy month because it was like everybody went from, hey, we're working in an office to we're all working at home. And so how we brought that kind of environment to a remote access, there was a lot of questions around Windows Virtual Desktop and how can that do that for us, for an organization to securely provide desktops and that kind of office experience remotely. So that really kind of pushed us to the forefront. But prior to that, there's still a lot of VDI infrastructure that people are running on premises, and I was getting a lot of questions about, okay, how can we leverage the cloud to either have more static costs or higher availability or performance, or removing some of these infrastructure requirements off. And so that really started that kind of conversation early on there prior to COVID kind of forcing it. And really we started to see, okay, these are a lot of organizations that are looking at how can we move our existing infrastructure into Azure, or how can we maybe maybe we're paying for Citrix or we're paying for Horizon or we're paying for one of these other softwares, and we're like, hey, how can we transition these costs into the cloud? And that was kind of a big driving factor there as well.
Well, you hit on security there, but let's delve that a little deeper. There's been a lot of sessions today related to security. How does WVD bring like secure remote IT administration to the front? I mean, how is it different than what we've seen in the past, or how are they changed and enhanced from a security perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from the security perspective, it was the authentication layer here that's really changed. And so by Microsoft providing the gateway service, by providing the broker service, in a sense, they're taking away some of those responsibilities that have from an infrastructure side that you need to secure and patch and maintain that. And then additionally, the Azure Active Directory piece, now with its integration into Azure AD, as I mentioned, things like conditional access, where we can enforce an MFA challenge from a user, maybe offsite, or if they don't have a hybrid AD joined device or an Active Directory joined device, we could potentially challenge them for other things. So there's lots of different conditions now that we can add in to WVD that just weren't there with RDS. I mean, that was just an Active Directory prompt that you were like, hey, here you go. So there's definitely some security at that initial connection layer. And then within actually Azure in itself, so the session hosts running on Azure have a bunch of different underlying uh, security configuration things through Azure. So if you use Azure Security Center, you can look at things like the application groups and network hardening and things like that that can, in a sense, lock down those particular machines. And really inherently how a WVD works is it's preventing direct connections to those session hosts anyway. So we're locking down networks to not publicly expose RDP ports or things that you would have to do with the gateway component with RDS. So there's definitely some enhancements there.
Okay. And David, feel free to jump in at any time. I've got a couple of follow-ups for Grant, though. So first is I see an area that this would seem like a very logical play, like in the education space with all the remote learning going on. Is that an area that you're seeing customers embracing WVD?
Yeah, we had initially a lot of pilots in education, and it was exactly for that. So remote learning was, hey, how can we provide an experience to these students that's similar to what being in a classroom is? And so well, one of the key advantages of WVD is the fact it does a Windows 10 multi-session. So prior to WVD, really remote desktop services, Citrix, et cetera, that was all Windows Server. And so the end user experience is a little bit different between Windows Server and Windows 10. So from a graphic and user experience or user interface level, Windows 10 is probably easier for people to work with. And so we kind of found a bunch of different pilots for and full deployments here for education that were around kind of presenting a Windows 10 desktop to a user that they can access from anywhere and from any device, and with a subset of applications on it that were specifically designed for what they were looking to do, and um, scale that out. So with those pooled desktops, we can get 20, 30, 40 or more people on a host at a time, depending on the applications they're running. And so there's really some density there that we can put into to these hosts at lowers costs.
Excellent. Now, and I think I saw a while back that because obviously we've all heard that Windows 7 is no longer supported, though I still see it in a lot of places. Is it possible that I read in there also that you can run Windows 7 Windows virtual desktops, so that it would allow you in essence to take those apps that you can't port off of Windows 7 and provide a mechanism to still be able to provide those in a secured fashion?
So there's been a couple different legacy OS approaches here. Windows 7 was one, 2012 R2, and I think they even had support for 2008 R2 there for a while. So there are use cases for that, and we have seen a couple organizations have been like, hey, this is an app that's really dragging down our ability to move forward with some of our other platforms, and so we can kind of capture that within an RDS or a WVD space. Maybe take an existing Citrix or RDS server and convert it to WVD that then presents it. So then you can kind of take that legacy app and present it in more modern fashion through the WVD portal. So we've seen that um, as kind of a way to modernize applications without actually modernizing them, right? We're just modernizing the presentation of them. But yeah, there's definitely been use cases for that.
That makes sense. So, David, what about you? Any thoughts you've got related to customers and why our customers that we're seeing that are embracing WVD at this point in time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go back a year and a half or so ago when I was talking to my counterpart at Microsoft about Windows Virtual Desktop, and it was very early in the development phases of that at the time. And one of my first questions to him, of course, we were right on the tail end of just getting most of our clients migrated over to Windows 10 off of Windows 7 and some XP. And my question was, why would my clients want to buy Windows Virtual Desktop? And he said, well, why wouldn't they? And we kind of got into the same conversation that Grant was just alluding to, and that is that, I think there's hardly an organization out there that can't make a use case for where Windows Virtual Desktop would make sense. Are you going to roll this out to every single employee in the company? No, probably not. But your remote workers, your temporary workers, interns, contractors. I mean, there's just a whole list of people within a corporate organization that this will make sense for. FinServ and your tellers. Why have a $2,000 desktop sitting there running Windows 10 that has to be, managed with other applications when you could just send down a WVD image and at the end of the day, boop, there it goes away. Students, you mentioned students, there's another great one. And I'm not going to start any conspiracy theories about the timing of COVID and the release of Windows Virtual Desktop. But it certainly worked in Windows Virtual Desktop's favor. The timing was pretty amazing, and it's been a savior, I think, for a lot of our clients, especially in the education space.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. I mean, not only WVD, but also things like Teams, absolute game changers for companies to be able to, in education especially, to be able to step into these situations. So it's great.
Absolutely.
So let me hit a couple common questions for y'all here. So first, let's use case one. Let's say I've got a 2,000 user environment running Windows 10. What advantage do I get from Windows Virtual Desktop? Why do I want it? What's the big drivers behind why I in that organization would want to have WVD? Either of you guys.
Yeah, I guess I'll probably start, but for a lot of it, it's just remote access, secured remote access, right? So being able to present a desktop or a set of applications to any device from anywhere, and still kind of validate the identity and the device that's connecting to it. That's probably the key thing here. I've seen other use cases for administrative purposes, so administrative desktops. So locking down a machine that users in the organization can remote into to perform administrative tasks. We've seen that as well, kind of stripping that away from individual user machines. And then, presentation of apps. So we've been talking a lot about desktops here, but you can strip away the actual desktop and present the application to a user, which kind of strips away some of the ability for the user to do things that might mess up a desktop, right? So, if you present them with just Excel or just Outlook, they can operate that app and nothing else within that. So there are ways, especially in the education space, we've seen, or some of the other ones are remote workers or contractors or things like that, where you can just present an application to that user. They access it directly through the WVD client, and that's their experience. So, from a data loss protection perspective, security perspective, there's a lot of advantages there.
Okay, excellent. Now let me next gen that question and say I'm that same organization, but I've already got Citrix or I've got VMware Horizon. Why would I need WVD?
Well, I've seen a lot of it is cost. So, there's a significant license cost to Citrix and to Horizon. And so I've had a number of customers we've gone through and the breakdown of what that looks like, right? So that's one piece, being native within Azure to running it just directly through Azure IaaS, right, as the session host as virtual machines, and leveraging all the PaaS components for Azure AD and other stuff. That's definitely there as well. But those have been kind of the key drivers, I guess, between the two is cost and some of the complexity.
Okay, but is there a better together play there as well? I mean, if I've got VMware Horizon or Citrix, does it have to be replaced by WVD, or is there a better together story potentially?
Yeah, it does not. No, and for most of the customers that have kind of been talking about Citrix, it's been or Citrix and VMware, it's been a game plan to maybe transition them into cloud or into native WVD, and some customers have looked at it and say, hey, we can. WVD allows us to still front it with Citrix. So if you're used to that Citrix experience, you could, continue to use Citrix, but then the backend is a WVD desktop. That's a capability there as well, and I believe they have that similar thing for Horizon. So we've seen some of that as a transitional type of thing from native on-prem Citrix or even cloud Citrix or Horizon to WVD. Both of those have been use cases that I've seen quite often.
Okay. So let's talk about dependencies for a minute. So obviously, I'm a huge Azure fan. It's where I live and breathe at this point in time. But let's say that my organization doesn't use Azure. Are there dependencies for WVD that require you to be in Azure?
Azure Active Directory is a dependency, right? So having identities there, synchronizing those identities from Active Directory, because kind of how that sign-in process works is it's validating an Azure AD object to an on-prem AD object. They have to match. So having Active Directory is a requirement. Other than that, that's pretty much it. The identity piece is there, so you can continue to run those backend remote session hosts on Azure, or we've seen them on-prem, or we've seen them even on other cloud environments. So from a performance standpoint and kind of best practice, Microsoft would recommend that everything runs within Azure, and latency is a fairly important thing with desktop performance, and we've seen this in organizations that put desktops in international locations for users there, and it is an international service, so you can run it in different regions, and the performance of it is pretty good, depending on where you locate the session host and also the service. But that's kind of been the direction.
Okay, now that makes good sense. And David, have you seen any other common questions related to WVD from customers at this point?
No, I think Grant covered that part pretty well. I did want to add, when we talk about the better together scenario, just to tack onto that one thought, and that is that, I know for a fact, having spoke to the guys there in Redmond, that this better together scenario with VMware and Citrix is not a casual relationship. They've got folks from both Citrix and VMware working with the Microsoft team on those scenarios and the integration of WVD and Horizon and Citrix. So, if you do own those products, it's certainly still something worth taking a look at for additional functionality and usability, and potentially down the road, some cost savings as well. So.
Okay, excellent. So moving on then, so I know we've done several deployments, lots of pilots, things of this nature. What type of lessons has Catapult learned so far working with WVD? You want to start again, Grant?
Yeah, we've done a number of pilots, so there's a lot of organizations that are looking to where do I get started with this and what are we using it for. So kind of designing those use cases is probably the first thing. And so we determine what those use cases are and what would be the best use of WVD. Is it pool desktops? Is it individual desktops? Is it application delivery? And kind of figure out where it makes sense to kind of build it. And then from there, we build a proof of concept that kind of goes through and shows the feature sets and how things work and how the user experience is, and really try to get users onboarded to use it, and kind of go from there. But the main thing is determining that use case and how best you can, in a sense, make WVD work for you, and then from there build it and scale it. So once it's built out and we've tested users and they've piloted it and we validate it works the way that we want, and the applications are there the way we want, and things like that, it's scaling it out to the environment from there, and integrating it into some monitoring solutions and that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, good. David, anything you'd like to add on to that?
Yeah, we started very early in this WVD life cycle with Microsoft, and we sent some of our guys up to airlift training very early in the process, and they came back and they were all shaking their head no. They were like, it's rough, it's difficult, it's complicated, it's kind of choppy right now. And now all I get is yes nods. Guys like Grant, Chris Cavazos, and others who have done a lot of these for customers really seem to be very positive about the product. Not only the ease of implementing it, but the ease of deploying it out to target groups of users as well. So, I'm I guess real excited about the opportunities going forward with it, based on the feedback I've gotten from the consultants.
Okay, excellent. So, WVD sounds interesting. So if we are interested in it, how do you get started? What online resources we got, things of that nature. What's a first step?
Yeah, there are some online documentation on it. The challenge is really the product has changed so much even within the last year. They have something they call the fall release and now the spring release. And so the challenge is really getting information that's current to the existing, deployments and how you would best practice design something. But that's one thing. Obviously we worked with customers and designing out a pilot and what that looks like from the beginning design phases to implementation to post support and roll out to production. So a couple different ways there that you can look at getting started.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, and Cameron, I think we've got some resources ourselves that we can help with, and we'll show those a little bit later in the presentation.
You got it. So let me actually, we're going to jump there for just a minute. So, and hit a couple of things and then potentially come back on some demo slides here in a minute. So David, you want to go ahead and talk us through, the ways that they can try the Windows Virtual Desktop?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So we've got two offerings out there. We initially started an offering, which was a rapid deployment offering for COVID, in response to COVID. Now that has calmed down a little bit and people have kind of settled on their way of working, we've changed it up a little bit. We have a pilot offer for organizations who have not touched WVD and really don't know how to get started. We'll come out, it's roughly about 2 weeks worth of time, and we'll deploy 25 machines and 15 of your corporate applications for you. Certain companies may qualify for some Microsoft incentives that'll help pay for that, and that's something that our account executive team can certainly help talk you through. If you want information, go out to getcatapultsystems.com/Windows Virtual Desktop Pilot. And again, that's for those who don't have it today, haven't touched it, would just like to get their feet wet. Now, if you've already gotten your feet wet, if you've piloted it internally and kind of toyed around with it, we also have a production deployment offer. And that's where our team can come out. They can help you do all of the planning and design for your rollout to your end user clients. They can help you with adoption and change management within the organization. And they can help you start getting that deployed out in a production environment for your users to take advantage of. Again, there are some Microsoft investment funds potentially available for certain organizations, and again, your account executive can help you work through that. So if you're interested in the production deployment, go out to getcatapultsystems.com/Windows Virtual Desktop Production Deployment. You'll also find out there, and I don't know the link off the top of my head, but we have it here, and we'll be sure and stick it into chat so everyone can get to as some secure remote work ebook that I think everyone would find interesting as well.
Well, that is excellent. Okay. So we're going to go back to Q&A here in a minute, but I wanted to jump to this for a second. So please, for those in attendance, please go ahead and take the survey. It gets you a chance to be able to win a $250 raffle. Pretty much just click on this within your camera and it'll open up the appropriate area for it. And we have 2 upcoming sessions, and like I said, we're going to go back to Q&A and potentially demo here in a minute. I wanted to thank everybody for attending the session. The next 2 sessions that are coming up are measuring your employee engagement with analytics and top tips for governing your M365 environment. Those links will be in the chat box as well as the call to action will be in the chat link. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for just a moment or two and open that up for Q&A. David, would you run that for me for a few moments, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So what questions do we have, folks? I believe Vince Vittori might have had a question.
They probably can't unmute. I don't know if our folks are able to do the unmute to allow them, or if we need to read the question that they had.
So for this session, I did not put settings that they couldn't unmute, so they should be able to, but if you do have an issue, Vince, just write it in, please. And I'm trying to unmute him, but it won't allow me to do so.
Yeah, I found the exact same situation. So actually what we'll do
I tried as well.
Okay. What we'll do for just a second here is we were missing some slides, so this was me switching over and hiding it behind the scenes and getting back to my slide decks. Just so you can see a little bit of what the Windows Virtual Desktop experience looks like. So Grant, do you want to talk us through a couple of quick slides here? So, what's the first one here that's getting started with WBD?
Yeah, so there's a couple different client connectivity options here, and one of which is there's a Windows client, which is what this is a screenshot of. There's a Mac client, there's a iOS client, there's a Google or Android client. So there's many different client options, but I figured I'd just walk through what does an end user see. And so the end user, when they launch that remote desktop for the first time, they can just subscribe here based off their username. So once they enter in a username or their user principal name or email address, it's going to then grab what associated desktops and apps that they have access to. And so I don't know, maybe I put this in the wrong order, but we can go to the one after this here and I'll talk
All right,
about
you
that.
got it.
There we go. Yep. So, once they've signed in, it's going to grab the workspace or what they'll call the access they have, what access they have to this, and then present them with icons. So here, there's a couple of different applications that we're presenting them, just native applications. There's an actual desktop. So that one on the far right, the Windows 10 desktop, is to get the desktop experience. And then that'll just load either the application or the desktop directly out of this app on the machine. The key advantage here for the Windows app is support for multi-monitors, support for resizing, a couple different usability options, I guess you could say, that are there. But that's mostly the main experience there. And then from a management perspective, if you want to go back to the last one, all of this is tied into the Azure portal itself now with what they call the spring release. So managing things like the host pools or the application groups and workspaces, all this is natively managed now within the Azure portal, which is kind of the main feature enhancement here for this latest release.
Okay, excellent. And I think we had one more slide. So what's this one here once we're connected in?
Yep, just grabbing a desktop. So at this point, we've launched a desktop out of the tool, and from there, we can resize that or full screen that or whatever you'd want to do with that. And I get a lot of questions from a security perspective. Hey, can we prevent copying and pasting and printing and bringing drives over, and all that is available here within this. You could lock down this desktop, from a DLP perspective.
So could I connect as an example from my Android device or an iPad or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And the experience would look like this, just adjusted to the specific screen?
Yep, it's going to be, the client is a little bit different versus the Windows client, so it looks a little bit different, but the experience is pretty much the same.